what? That's me. Hello, everybody. Can you see me? It should be working. It says, thank you. Thank you. I'm alive again. All right. Thank you, Chris. Hey, thanks everybody for being patient with us as we figure out how this fine system works here. Um, for Facebook, it's kind of a new thing, I think, for all of us. Certainly a new thing for me. Um, but it's a great thing too. It gives us a chance to still talk about stuff and visit and all those. I think that's great. So we're gonna today we're gonna talk about surf fishing. I'm gonna give you a seminar today on surf fishing about what equipment I like to use, the rigging I like to use, the baits we'll use, how to hook those baits. I want to answer everybody's questions that I can. And then I think maybe last but not least, hopefully in your questions and two, we'll talk about finding fish at the beach also. So all of those things will hopefully help you. To start out, while we're waiting for a few more people to get online and people to figure out that I figured it out, I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of a couple things. One is a surf fishing report, Santa Barbara to San Diego. And then another thing I'd like to talk to you about is what beaches are open, which beaches are closed, and what are the rules and all of those type of things. Well, the first thing is our surf fishing report. We have had, and as expected, we have had great surf fishing, really for at least the past month or so. If you were to go back and look back at the movement of the swell and the current offshore. So, for example, when I go to the beach, I look straight out in front of me into the water as soon as I get there, and I look to see if the waves and the water and the foam are moving up the coast or if they're moving down the coast. By doing that, I'll have a really good idea of not only which way my bait's going to go, but whether the water's getting warmer because it's coming up the coast or if it's getting cooler because it's coming down the coast. So that's the first thing I'm going to look for. If I went back, let's say a month ago, I would see a month ago that the water was actually going up the coast. That's a really good sign. Whenever we see the swell and the movement of the current up the coast from south to north, we know that summer's here, that summer's coming, and that the water's going to warm up considerably. So here's a really good example for you to keep your eye on that, and also to have a good idea to know what the beach conditions are like. Regardless of where you go fishing, it'll give you a good idea. If you look at the HB Huntington Beach, and I think it's just abbreviated HB webcams, if you look at those webcams, they will give you a very good view that you can enlarge on your screen to see which way the water's moving. You'll be able to see whether or not the foam is going up toward the north, which is what we want in the summer, pushed from the southern swells, or coming down from the north to the south, which is of course from storms up in the Aleutian Islands. That's what we're going to see in the wintertime. So that's one thing we look for. I look for that every day. I look on my webcams. There's almost a webcam on every beach along the California coast. And I look on those webcams. They give me a good idea of the tide at that time, the crowd at that time, whether there's a red tide, whether the water's going north or south. Those kind of things are really, really important to know. So back to the fish report, having looked at and watched and talked to a lot of people, the water is really warming up. We've had a couple of storms from the south. We've had 3 or 4 swells from the south already. All is really good news as it pushes warm, clear water north. Up in Santa Barbara, they've had some really good halibut fishing. They got 3 reports this week. One with about a 30-inch halibut off the wharf. The wharf is open there, as is the Goleta Pier, which is up by UC Santa Barbara. Those are open if you want to fish from the pier. There was a nice fish there. There's a really nice fish, another legal fish that was taken at the harbor mouth, which is there's a big sand spit there on the western side of the harbor mouth, and that's a really good place to halibut fish. And then the last place where another 30-inch fish, about a 12-pound halibut was caught, was right down below the White Estate, just south of East Beach, or where the bathhouse is in each beach. And there in Santa Barbara, there is a huge estate. And then right next to it is a cemetery, which seems odd. I don't think I would have paid that much for it if there was a cemetery next door. But below it, there are metal groins that are probably about 150 feet long. There's 3 of them in a row that go out into the water there, and those were metal groins that were used, that had a pipe in them, that were used in right around 1900 to fill up the hot tubs of Mayor White, who was the mayor of New York in those days, 1900, to fill up his pools and so forth. So those are still there, and they are excellent spots for fishing halibut. And really the secret there, and we saw it again this time on this fish, is they were using a 6-inch white fluke. So there's a lot of places where you fish for halibut, and if you used a white swim bait or lure or something, you'd never catch a thing. But for whatever reason up there, it might be squid or something like that, it's been really good fishing. So as we move our way down toward Leo Carrillo, Malibu, that area, the areas that are open, of course, up there, Zuma is completely closed. Big Dune, Little Dune is closed. Those are all MLPA areas. But when we're looking at the other areas, it has some very good perch fishing up there. And right where the turn is, where you start going over to Santa Monica Pier, which is about Topanga Canyon, where that comes down, from that area all the way to the pier really has been really good yellowfin croaker fishing almost every cast for the past 2 or 3 days. So that's been good. And then if we make our way down to Huntington Beach, I mean, that place never sleeps. It's the Las Vegas of surf fishing. It has been good all year long. It's had some phenomenal surf fishing in the winter. As of about 2 months ago, down in Surfside, which is on the western part of Huntington Beach there. Fantastic surf fishing down there for yellowfin croaker, some up to 4 pounds or so down there. And guys were fishing mostly crocodiles and castmasters. And a lot of those folks were fishing before the sun came up. Probably about 4:30 to about 6 o'clock in the morning was the best bite for all those yellowfin croaker that were down around Surfside. And then when you go from Surfside down to Bolsa Chica, and then Bolsa Chica south to the Huntington Pier, not only has there been really good perch fishing there, but not big perch, but a lot, but there's been phenomenal corbina and even better spot fin croaker fishing there. And most of the corbina in that area, as the ones we're going to talk about in San Diego, have all been on sand crabs. We're finding a lot of sand crabs now. And in addition to that, the spot fin croaker have been really active on bloodworms, lugworms, and ghost shrimp. You'll catch one now and then on a sand crab, but mostly those spot fin, they really like those soft baits. They love the worms, the mussels, the shrimp, things like that. Those are their favorite baits. Newport Beach has had a couple of spot fin I've seen down there, but really some phenomenal perch fishing. I've seen a couple 2.5 pound perch from right around the jetties there, right around 62nd Street. So that's a really good spot. And then just yesterday, I got 3 reports from San Diego where the beaches are open. Carlsbad was probably the biggest fish, and then Torrey Pines. 3 big corbina down there. One was about 24 inches. So that's the fish report up and down the coast. It just gets better every day. This is typical summertime surf fishing, and as the days go on, it will get better and better. As far as catching sand crabs, there's a lot more sand crabs on the beach. But if I was you and I wanted to go out and catch crabs, catch bait, the first thing that I would do is I would decide to go under a pier at high tide. I'd look for the crabs there. The reason that you find so many sand crabs under the pier is that as the waves wrap around the pilings of the pier, they drop sand, or they pile up sand on the windward side or the leeward side of the pilings, and it's softer and the sand's deeper there. And so sand crabs accumulate there. As time goes on and they spawn, their eggs go out all along the beach, and you'll find them all along the beach when we get here in about another month or so. But if I was looking for sand crabs, I'd go and I'd look underneath the piers at high tide. And if I was really good at it and really wanted to find only soft shells, I'd try to find the high tide that's about in the middle of the night. And then I'd go under the piers and look then. The reason that's particularly good at that time is that by then there's been hours since anybody's walked down there, and all those crabs are up on the surface, and particularly the soft crabs. So that's a little bit of overview of the bait and all that. And then as far as what's open and closed, most of the beaches, if not all of the beaches, are open now, with the exception of just a couple of them. What is happening, of course, is that we have limited parking, very limited parking down there. So that's been kind of a struggle. And I've talked to the mayor of Redondo Beach and several other authorities regarding what's allowable on the beach, what's not allowable on the beach. Earlier, they wanted people to wear masks and to move as you fish and social distance. Those are things, other than the mask, those are things that we do anyway. So we never really have to worry about that. And I've gotten reports from folks in Hermosa Beach, San Diego, Orange County, that they haven't had any problems. If you do come across a lifeguard or a police officer, which I doubt, but it's possible, who asks you to move on, just pick up your stuff and leave. There's no reason to fight it, and just move on to another beach or take your car down another couple hundred yards and start over again. So that would be my suggestion. Now, today I wanted to cover, first of all, rod and reel combinations. So let's take a look at those. When I'm surf fishing, I like to fish with a 7 to 9 foot, very light action rod. Probably the best example of this would be if you looked in your garage at your trout rods. And if I was starting out surf fishing, I'd just go look in my garage. I'd find the longest trout rod I could find, anywhere between 7 and 9 feet. I'd put a small spinning reel on it with 6-pound test, and I'm ready to go. As time goes on and you get more interested and more involved in surf fishing, you can always go out and look and see the other rods that are available on the market, anywhere from maybe $200 to $400 for surf rods. Most of these rods are very, very well made. They'll last a long time. All you really need to do is just rinse them off and dry them off with a dry towel after you come home from fishing, and you're ready to go. That probably lasts you for your grandkids. When it comes to reels, there's a big difference there. Here's an example of a 2500 size spinning reel, and let me just pull out another one to make it a little bit easier. When it comes to spinning reels, and this is see if I can get it in the light here so maybe we can see it. This reel is a 2500 size reel. All fishing reels, all surf fishing reels, you never want to spend more than $100 on your surf fishing reel. The reason for that, regardless of how good you are, how coordinated you are, how quick you are in your feet, or how bright you are, at some point in time, sand is going to get inside this reel. And once there's just 1 or 2 grains of sand in here, within a few days you won't even be able to turn the handle any longer. So I would never go out and spend $1,000 on a spinning reel that I'm going to use at the beach, because inevitably it's going to get sand in it. I'll drop it in the water, wind will blow sand on it, sand will get on my hands from bait or taking a fish off the line, etc. So some of my favorite reels would be the Shimano Sedona, the Sienna. Daiwa makes some excellent reels. One of my favorite reels by far is the Penn Battle 2. I normally purchase a 2500 or a 3000 size. Those are the sizes that I like. And then I take those reels and I load them up with 6-pound monofilament. I like to use red monofilament. And this is the line I normally use. This is the Cajun red line. Comes in a spool that is about $12 for a spool of line. It's about enough to fill up your reel about 12 times. So, with tax, you're only looking at probably $1.30 every time you fill your spool. And I would say for myself, I replace my line about 4 times, 5 times a year. It all depends on how much you use it. But certainly every single year, if you put your gear away for the winter and you're getting geared up to fish this summer, strip off all that old line. Always put on new line before you go out fishing for the first time. It's a very strong line. This line, which is rated for 6-pound test, breaks at about 12 pounds. So it's very, very strong. And it's great because it has a lot of stretch to it. That's what we're always looking for in the surf is stretch on our line. We don't want it too stiff. So that's the rod and reel combination. They're really very simple. And as I said, if you're starting out, just go out in the garage, find your longest trout rod. You're ready to go. New line, you're ready to go. The second component of surf fishing, of course, is the rigging. I would say that 90% of the time or more, I use the Carolina rig. And the Carolina rig is a very simple rig. It's made up of a sliding sinker, a bead, a swivel, which is black and you can't see it. Very, very difficult to see. There's a reason for that, of course. Leader, 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. And on the end of that, I have a very sharp hook, which is really hard to see, but I'll see if I can get it up here a little bit closer to the camera. And that is a very thin wire hook, and that is the secret to surf fishing. So the first thing is our sliding sinker. I'll normally fish a 1/4 or really even a 1/8 ounce, very, very light, all the way up to a 1 ounce sinker. Most of the time I'm fishing 3/4 of an ounce. That would be your general day down at the beach with medium-sized surf. The bigger the surf, the heavier the sinker. The smaller the surf, the lighter the sinker. So, as I said, in most cases, a 1/2 or 3/4 ounce. But if I go down to the beach and the waves are, like this high, and I look out into the water and I'm going fishing, and it's windy, let's say, I might use up to 1 ounce. If I'm going to fish near rocks where my line might get tangled in the rocks, I'm not going to worry about the weight on my line. I'm much more interested in not getting it snagged. So I will fish as little as 1/8 of an ounce. So let's say I'm standing on a jetty and I just cast the line out in front of me. I'm not going to cast overhead way out into the ocean. The fish are right in front of me, right where the rocks meet the sand. I'm going to put my line right there. I'm going to fish a very, very light sinker. If I fish a heavier sinker, it'll immediately get caught in the rocks and I'll break off. If I fish a really light sinker, like an 1/8 ounce sliding sinker, I'll be able to jig it out and 8 out of 10 times get it out, be able to fish again. So the bigger the surf, the heavier the sinker. The reason that we need sinkers on our rig at all, and certainly as the surf gets bigger, is that all surf fish feed on the bottom. They're all bottom feeders. They're not up here feeding. They're way down by the bottom. So if my weight is too light, my bait is going to be way up by the surface. So I always err on the side of putting more weight on, with the exception of fishing by rocks, more weight on to make sure I'm always on the bottom. If I'm fishing and I don't get bites after 20 minutes, first thing I do is put on a heavier sinker so I know my bait is on the bottom where the fish are feeding. Most surf fish several have a little barbell on their chin, all the croakers, corbina, spotfin, yellowfin croaker, and they use that barbell to rub in the sand, and after going through the sand and using that barbell, they can feel with that where their food is. So they're always down on the bottom. That's where we want our bait to be. Between the sinker and the swivel, I use a 6mm bead. This is a clear bead. Now, I use both clear and colored beads. I have both, in this case, red beads. And in this hand, I have clear beads. In the wintertime, I'm always going to use red beads. I'm going to use red beads, or I'm going to use orange beads. And the reason that I'm going to do that is that in the wintertime, perch are attracted to these colors. When the summertime comes, I'm always, right now, so that would be at the latest May 1st through October 1st, I'm always going to use clear beads. Here's a big bag of clear beads, 6mm beads. I'm going to use clear because in the summertime, when I'm fishing for corbina, or certainly hope to get a nice big corbina, I know that they have very keen eyesight. They can easily see these beads. So if I have a clear bead, I have a much better chance because that bead will lay down in the sand. And if that bead is down in the sand, it looks like a much more natural look than if it was a bright orange or bright red bead there. Corbina have extremely good eyesight. They can see you standing on the sand. They can feel any movement. So anything you can do to be a little bit more stealth will give you much more success with those fish. Then below the bead, I have a swivel. I always fish a black swivel, and I normally fish a 10, a 12, or a 14 swivel. The biggest would be the 10, the smallest would be the 14, and the reason I use a black swivel once again is when it's laying down in the sand and it's coming across the sand, it looks much more natural. It looks like another grain of sand. If I was used to use a zinc-plated swivel, or I was to use a brass swivel, they're very bright with the sun shining. You know how it's foggy and then it clears up and it's foggy and it clears up. Every time that sun comes out and beats down on that swivel, if it's zinc-plated, chrome-plated, brass, it shines up, and that is going to scare fish away. Surf fish got big by being smart. A 24-inch Corbina is probably about 15 years old. So it really had to be smart to get to that age. So we have to be stealth too. And then below the swivel, all the way to my hook, is my leader material. I always use 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. The reason that I use fluorocarbon is a couple reasons. One is it's invisible. At least we're told it's invisible. And to fish, it really does appear invisible. It works by using refraction. Like if you thought back to when you're in 6th grade and you did the science test and you had a glass of water and you put a pencil in the glass and you looked at it from the side, it would look like the pencil's broken. Well, that's exactly how fluorocarbon works too. It has that same properties. But the other thing about fluorocarbon is it's a woven monofilament. For example, if I was to take 3 strands of monofilament, weave them together, and then melt them, it would create something like this line. That makes it very abrasion resistant. If I was to get a little chink in this line by rubbing against the rocks or on the sand or hanging up with a surfer or kelp or any of those things, if I got a little chip on my main line here, it would break very easily. But because on my fluorocarbon it's a woven monofilament, even though it gets a nick in it, it still has 2 really strong strands. And that's the main reason that we love to use the fluorocarbon leader. Leader also has a rule to it. The bigger the surf, the shorter the leader. So remember we said the bigger the surf, the heavier the sinker, so we stay on the bottom? The same thing holds true for the leader. The bigger the surf, the shorter your leader. If you have a long leader and the swell is big, your bait's way up here somewhere. If you shorten your leader down substantially, it's much closer to the bottom. So the bigger the surf, the shorter your leader. Once again, if you go down to the beach and you go fishing, you don't get any bites for 20 minutes or so, I would have I put on a heavier sinker and I'd shorten my leader. Normally I fish a leader about 18 to 22 inches. That would be 80% of the time. But if the surf is larger, I might go all the way down to 10 inches. And if I go down on a day, a Santa Ana day, let's say I go down in November and the wind's blowing offshore and the waves are 2 inches high, I might have a long leader that day, like 36 or 40 inches, because I don't have to worry about it being on the bottom because the swell is small and the water is very calm. So the bigger the surf, the shorter your leader. And then at the end, I have 1 or 2 hooks. This hook that's on the end, and let's see if I can figure out where I can get it. Here we go. There we go. This hook is a Gamagatsu split shot, drop shot hook. I'll normally fish a number 1, which would be the biggest, a 2, or a 4. The reason that we use these hooks is that they are super sharp. They're very thin, and they're super sharp. This hook, a number 2, is the same size as a number 2 that you'd use for tuna fishing. But the difference is that the tuna hook is about 3 or 4 times the diameter its shaft as these hooks are. In the surf, you need a very, very sharp hook. And the reason you need that is that unlike a boat or the pier, you're not over the fish. The fish is not below you. So if you're standing on a pier, the fish is below you. If you're on a boat, the fish is below you. And your line is perpendicular to that fish's mouth. It's perpendicular like this. So when you get a bite and you pull and set the hook goes straight up into the top of its mouth. In surf fishing, it's like I'm casting out to you out there. My line is straight out in front of me. It's not below me any longer. And so there's always going to be slack in my line, a little rake in the line. And in addition to that, if I feel a bite and I was to pull it all the fish has to do is open its mouth and out comes the bait because you're not perpendicular. So having a very thin wire, a very sharp hook like this will allow you to, as soon as you feel a tap on your line, because you're, number one, always tight to your sinker. You never allow there to be any slack. And number two, when you get a bite, you don't go to set the hook. All you do is just reel down and lift your rod up. And if you don't get the fish for any reason, just let your bait down to the bottom. 7 out of 10 times the fish will come right back after it. So this is one example, the Gamagatsu split shot, drop shot hook. And once again, those are 10, size 10. Excuse me, size 10, that'd be small. Size 1, 2, or 4. So this is a look at the package for the Gamagatsu. Let's see if we can get, there we go. These people gotta love me. And then another great hook, and it's a little bit less expensive, is the Owner Mosquito hook. Now, Owner makes this hook, and then it's got a package just like this that has a little yellow box on it, and it says light, Mosquito light. And if you can find that, that is the best hook. That's probably the best hook for surf fishing. Gamagatsu is very, very good, but that might be even a little bit better. It's a little bit less expensive. And the reason it's called a light is that they took these hooks, this original Mosquito hook, and then they decided on it that maybe it was a little bit too thick. And so they decided to go ahead and make a light version of it where the shaft on it was even thinner. So that's a great hook. So that's one of the hooks I use. The second hook that I use, which is a worm hook, is known as a Sproat hook, Sproat. And Sproat hooks are made by Mustad. They are a long shank hook. See if I can figure out. There we go. These are long shank hooks that are black hooks, just like the other ones. I don't fish zinc plated or red or any other color. I want to have a black color hook just in case I need to pull it out, leave it into the fish and let it rust out. These hooks will work perfect for that. So these hooks, which are the Mustad Sproat hook. The Mustad Sproat hook is exceptionally good for any type of long bait that you have. So if you have a bait where the it's a worm or it's a long bait like a ghost shrimp or something like that, this is the hook that you want to use because it's going to allow you to either slide the worm up the hook and give it the correct presentation, or with a longer bait to be able to put your hook through the bait. A hook that we used to use somewhat similar to this in the past was a kale hook, which was a little bit bigger than this, but basically the same idea. It was large enough to use in these longer baits. And I'm going to show you in a minute how to do that. So that's the rod and reel combination. That's the setup that we have for our rigging. And you know, one thing about the rigging and our leaders and the different hooks we use, I like to take a leader holder, and in front of the TV at night when I've got my glasses on, it's quiet and I got a lot of light, and I like to tie maybe 8 or 10 leaders, couple with Sproat hooks, all the rest with Gamagatsu or Owner Mosquito hooks, have those all tied up with several different lengths and have them ready to go. The last thing that you want to do is go to the beach and at 5:30 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning or really any time, take time to re-rig. You want to be able to just pull off one of those leaders, cut off the one that you have that's got a knot in it, the hook broke off on, whatever your reason is that you need to change the size. And if you already have them tied, all you have to do is either tie them or clip them right on. You're ready to go. Be prepared before you get to the beach. You know, one thing about surf fishing, unlike sometimes other types of fishing, and maybe tuna fishing is like this too, there's sporadic moments where it's very, very good. And then 20 minutes later could shut off completely. And if you've spent 15 of those minutes tying hooks and tying leaders and tying things on your line, you have wasted all of that time. So be prepared in advance. That's my true suggestion for that. The night before you go down there, be prepared. So that's the overview of the rigging and, of course, of the rod and reel combination. So I want to talk a little about baits and rigging baits and stuff like that. And then maybe we can answer some questions. One of the most popular baits that we find in the surf is the Gulp sandworms. These are red ones, blood red. And, of course, there's a blood red variety. There is the camo variety. These all work very well. When these first came out, they were sent to us, and they asked us to go out and test them. We went all up and down the California coast. We actually had 5 different anglers who fished them from Santa Barbara to San Diego for about 3 months, about 3 days a week. They sent us all their pictures, and we figured out what size was right, and all that. We figured out right away that 2.5 inches was the right length, not these big long 6-inch ones that they had. We found out that probably the camo worked better than the other colors, the red, although they all work depending on what conditions you have and things like that. But what we also learned was that none of the fish that we caught or anglers caught were really very big. They caught a lot of fish. They weren't particularly large. If you look at all the California state records, all of the records with the exception of one have been set with live bait. So we love to use these to find fish. Like I'll walk down the beach and I'll have this on my line and I'll cast out. I'll go in a fan casting motion where I cast to my left, cast straight out, go to my right, go through that pattern about 5 times. And of course I'm casting out, letting it go to the bottom, slowly retrieving to shore, making sure I'm always tight to my sinker. And then when the bait is up on the shore, cast it out again. I'll go through that maybe 5 times. And if I don't catch a fish, I'll walk 100 yards down the beach and I'll go through that same process again. I'm using this bait. It's easy to cast. It's not going to come off. I don't need to rebait. And as soon as I get a bite or I get a fish right there, that's where I know the fish are. I reel in, I take this bait off, I grab a live bait out of my bait bucket. And here's an example of the bait bucket I use. And this, of course, just clips onto your waist, on your belt, and goes on your waist, and you keep your bait inside of here. And I just grab one of my sand crabs or ghost shrimp or worms or sidewinder crabs, whatever I'm using, and put it on a hook, and then go right back to that same spot that I was fishing and I just got a bite on these baits. So these are really great baits that the Gulp to use. I like them. They help me find fish. They seem to work a little bit better in the winter than the summertime. And I always suggest to everybody that once you get these, put them in a Ziploc bag and then put them in a second Ziploc bag, because I guarantee no matter what you do, they're going to leak. So to give you an idea of how we hook those, it's really quite simple, but it's important that you get them the right way. Here's a grub, and a grub, of course, was a 2.5-inch grub. Let's see if you can get it out of the light here. There we go. This is about a 2.5-inch grub, and this has a curly tail. They have little ones that have stub tails. These also work very, very well, just like the Gulp bait. And there is a specific way to hook them, and you hook them exactly the same as with the Gulp. And I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these Gamagatsu split shot, drop shot hooks or owner Mosquito hooks, and we're going to take that little grub. And so what we're going to do with the grub is we're going to take our hook here, and the grub is going to go the hook is going to go in the very top of the grub. You're going to push the grub so its body slides up the hook. And then you're going to punch the hook out through the side. And you're going to pull the grub up. And your most important thing of all is to make sure that the grub is as flat as possible on that hook. That's exactly the same for the Gulp baits. If there's any turn at all, So if it gets down like this, that's what we call getting your pants pulled down when you get a bite. If there's any turn at all in the grub, it'll spin in a circle as it goes by. It'll spin like this. If it's perfectly flat on the hook, the tail will wiggle and it will come to shore and look perfectly natural. So once again, we take the hook. Let's just take that off of there. We take the grub. We take the hook. This is the head up here. This would be the tail. We put the hook right through there, very center of the head. And then we slide the hook up, punch it out through the side so that we're sure that the grub is as flat as possible on that hook. And that's how we do both grubs and the Gulp sandworm. The other hook that we had, which was the Sproat hook, Sproat. And these Sproat hooks, these look almost exactly, like a bait holder hook. Like you went down to your local tackle store and you said, hey, I need some hooks for surf fishing. They'd say, hey, we got these bait holder hooks for you. And they have a long shank on them. They have like a couple barbs on there that hold your bait on there. But what makes the difference between these Sproat hooks and those hooks is that a Sproat hook, the tip of the hook is offset from the eye of the hook. So in other words, if I had a pair of pliers on one side of the hook and a pair of pliers on the other side of the hook, and I turned it in opposite directions, the tip would not line up with the eye. It'd be off to the side. The reason we won't want that is because when we put our bait on, if it's slightly off to the side, what happens? Spins in a circle. Spins in a circle. The more it spins in a circle, the less realistic it looks. There's not one big fish that got big in the ocean because, like I said, they got big by being smart, that came by and saw baits spinning in a circle. They're always looking for something that swims like this, like something that came out of the sand, like a snake, a worm that goes in that manner, that doesn't spin in a circle. So we use these long shank hooks. I have a worm here, so this could be a bloodworm, a bloodworm. There could be a sandworm that you dig up in the sand. You'll find those under grunion eggs, a lugworm. Any one of those worms will work in the surf. And all we do here is we're very similar to the grub. We take the worm, and certainly at the top here where its head is, we insert right in the center, like right down its mouth if it's a worm. We insert this hook, and then we take the worm and we push it up the shank of the hook. And then once it's up far enough, we punch the hook out. Unlike any other bait, when we have a worm, we go all the way down as far as we can with the worm. So actually, ideally, only 2 inches of the worm is below the hook. And then all of the rest of the worm, as you can see I'm doing with this one, we pull it up our line actually. The hook ends about right here, and all this is up our line.